So hi, my name is Michelle Rioux. I'm the director of the Center for Research on Integration and Globalization. It is my pleasure to be with you tonight, even though it's only virtually. Thanks to the technology, we can now participate even from distant location. I would be also ready, if the connection allows it, to take your question after this recording. So I want to thank the organizer for allowing me to share some ideas with you, and they suggested a title for me, which is quite an ambitious project, but I have accepted it. So the title of my presentation is Towards a New Global Governance for the Cultural Industries in the Digital Era. So first of all, I would like just to address some idea about global governance first, and then go more specifically on the topic. So new emerging global governance does not have to be considered as a set of coherent rules enforced through a global central regulatory organization. Actually, there is a wide set of organization at different levels and of different DNAs collaborating and competing in a very challenging and fast-changing digital capitalist world. The new global regulatory architecture emerging, both from public and private sources, is to be considered a testimony of the inability of the old forms of governance to answer today's regulatory challenges. In this communication, we first discuss the theoretical framework for explaining institutional changes that concentrate on the concept of rivalry between old and new. We also discuss, secondly, boundary decisions problems that arises. We borrowed this concept from Cox and Jacobson in a contribution as old as 1973. And these boundary decision problems arise from strategic and diplomatic relations between actors in a quest to influence institutional trajectories. So we have to see that global governance is a field where there are competing sets of rules and competing interests shaping also the global governance architecture. To go on these boundary decisions problems, they are increasing in numbers and significance, and they involve not only states but also issues, area, and sectors, as illustrated with the example from the global governance dealing more specifically with the trade, culture, and telecommunication nexus, which is very close to the subject that has been submitted to me. So we argue in a research that we've just finished that governance is no longer about national market regulation or international cooperation as understood traditionally for managing interdependence between national systems, but more about market integration and transnational network coordination, and that a process of creative destruction is underway which involves transformative alignments of old institutions as well as the emergence of new sites of governance reflecting a new integrative process and new sets of relationship between a plurality of actors. In order to develop our arguments, our research, we opted for a Schumpeterian historical-based approach to link the evolution of economic organization and institutional emergence to regulate conflicts arising from disruptive rather than smooth evolution. That is, the fact that technological changes and the internet is producing a shift in the evolution of things. In this narrative, international organization and national states face a new challenge, that of surviving and adjusting to a transformed world by globalization and technological changes, which come accompanied with increasing and multiple boundary problems between national regulation, which undermines thus the sovereignty principles and interdependence relationships, and between functional regulation, which undermines the separation between issues, for instance, trade, culture, telecommunication, internet, investment, etc. So globalization and technological revolution in effect have considerably changed the instrument and strategies traditionally used by states to govern their activities and the way they conduct international cooperation. In fact, we notice now that the big change, the big shift, is that it is no longer about national market regulation, as we've said, or international cooperation for maintaining and managing interdependence between national systems, but more about market integration and transnational network coordination. So, now that we have approached the main boundary problems that we want to address in this presentation, that is the functional and the national international one, I'd like to address more specifically the end of boundary problems within the cultural industry or the cultural sector. So what we can say about the transformation occurring and affecting the cultural industry, well, first of all, there is a great deal of opportunities linked to the digital revolution and the deployment of broadband internet networks. They are numerous and significant. And yes, public policies and international cooperation must still play a role, but within changed parameters as we have said. Threats are also real and significant. Obvious threats are identified with regards to financing and monetizing online cultural content, but also from the legal and economic uncertainties arising from the fact that we have a great difficulty in classifying products and services due to dematerialization linked to digital technologies. We also have highlighted the impact of trade agreements on cultural industries and the emergence of economic concentration, which is in itself one of the greatest threats to the cultural industries, its development and its diversity. We identified also that both North and South is the same problem, but of course when we talk about the South, there is an increased risk of the digital fracture, digital divide, that has to be emphasized. And it's not only in sense of increasing access to technology and networks, but it is also in terms of literacy, digital literacy, and also empowerment through use of technology. You know, like we can actually change, not only consume, but use them to be present and active on the internet. But we also can notice that a lot of companies down north, down south, and also the civil society there are increasingly being creative and putting out some new initiatives that are very important, especially in terms of feeding some indication of what is to be supported by public policies in those countries where capacity is rather limited. So we also developed an argument so that, oh, I'm sorry, I have to change, yes, okay. What we would like to emphasize is also the fact that rather than having cultural policies, we must now think more in terms of having a digital strategy that includes a cultural component. And that also involves having, you know, the linkage between the cultural industries within the development strategies of countries, including thus the digital component of that strategy. This is important in terms of addressing threats, but also mostly to make sure that opportunities coming with the digital revolution is capitalized on and transformed into real gains in terms of development and presence of different voices around the world on the internet. So in a sense, instead of promoting the adjustment of cultural policy, we would also promote something like strategies that harness the potential of the digital age to advance cultural industries. So in a sense, what we're noticing is that because of the boundary problems that affect the policy issues within the world at the moment in different sectors and also in the cultural industries, it is these strategies must really link together the national, the international, and the transnational, which is very difficult to operate that kind of a shift, but also to make links between governance issues areas that have been developed and governed through silos that were really independently elaborated and maintained. So now what does that mean? It means that you cannot have a cultural development of cultural industry through cultural policy without taking into account what you do on the other hand, on the trade side or economic side or in the digital virage or shift that you want to operate in your country, in your economy, in your different sectors. And also the telecommunication and internet. So the internet and the telecommunication sector is more and more increasingly linked to cultural industries, to a point where it is very difficult now to distinguish what which is what, and what is the most important. Is it? I would just ask a question, probably very provocative for people in the cultural industry, that perhaps looking at what's going on the internet governance and the governance of telecommunication more generally, is probably more determinant in structuring than actually looking at what is going on the cultural industry policy side of things. So that means that, for instance, at UNESCO, where there is like the Infocom people with the internet strategy and the culture, there's a need to work together, and also at the same level, at the same thing at the national level, that the people work on the trade and the cultural, and also on the internet regulation of the internet and telecommunication, must collaborate because of the convergence of technologies, because of the impact of that convergence on the future and the trajectories of cultural industries. But that being said, then what to promote? What is the good course or strategy policy to adopt? In a time of extreme rapid change as we're living in, we need to know more about the problem. The problem right now is that we can no longer have any certainty on what's the situation, or to seize the problem and how to solve it, of course, is extremely complex. So what do we know about the problem? Well, the first thing. Well, for some, the digital era ends the protectionism and it's the victory of globalization. And for others, the opportunities, it's the opportunity to rethink policies and regulation to adapt as things have changed dramatically. We want to take that as an approach, especially because of what we said before, is that with the digital revolution, it's not only opportunities and benefits, but it also threats, but also beyond the threats, it's also a new context that needs better institution and policy, even though it is to take advantage of the opportunities coming with the change. So, can we measure the impact of digital technologies on the cultural industries? Well, we have no way of knowing that. Right now, it's impossible to understand the nature of the linkage between trade, internet, and the digital technologies and the cultural industries, or the diversity of cultural expression. I think that what is amazing in that, and goes back to the point of the functional fragmentation of things and the lacking of analysis and grasp of the interaction between silos issues, we know a lot of things on culture. We have some indicators on trade, of course, the economy, but we also have a lot of, thanks to the ITU and others, the International Telecommunication Union, and others, the OECD and the like, we have a lot of statistics on networks and services and etc. But we have no way of using those to make an analysis, or it still has to be done, right? So one thing for sure is the fact that we're lacking a lot of instrument to measure these new transnational flows and these new transnational networks and how they shape cultural industries. Although the impacts of digital technologies on cultural industries is not measured precisely now, and it is too early to do a diagnostic on this, changes brought about the digital technologies, and especially the internet, coincide with what we have called the process of creative destruction. And we can now see the manifestation of these changes. For instance, if we look at data coming from Global Data Insights, the Global Entertainment Media Outlook of 2014, we see clearly that there is a digital migration that is occurring, including in the cultural industry. Of course, they predict that the media industry, cultural industries, in 2018 will still be dominated by non-digital formats and by the United States as being the leader, of course, in this industry. However, we see, for instance, the rise of China, but also the rise of the digital sector. And in 5 years or 4 years from now, they will have made a great leap forward. We also notice that the revenue from advertising and internet service providers are progressing, and there is an underlying problem of monetization of cultural products. Consumers want more content, but they increasingly expect to access content for free or by subscription. So there's different modes of consuming, and this has a lot of incidence on revenues and who gets the revenue, of course. So now that we know that the service provider get a lot of business, and publicity is also making a lot of revenue, but artists and producers traditionally and that have been working traditionally in the cultural industry seems to be losing out. So the 5 challenges that we've noticed, of course, and I will not teach you anything, but just to go back quickly over them, is dematerialization, the fact that it's no longer easy to distinguish what is a good or something physical on physical support and a service. So a lot of cultural products right now are now services. More than product, and that has a lot of implication, of course, on the trade front, where what is a service is governed with different type of trade rules than services, of course. But also there is the disintermediation. Consumers have the ability to share online, and of course that comes with the problem of piracy. And we have seen that a lot of countries are facing losses with this. The losses derived from the piracy, pirating music and film and everything. But at the same time, there is a great deal of benefit from sharing information online. So there is a kind of nuanced approach to be adopted or developed in order so that we don't kill the proper sharing, and that we also defend rights of authors and creators to be getting from the sales of the monetization of their products. There is also the problem of decompartmentalization, refers to the problem of the process of convergence. So as I said before, all the telecommunication sector, the media sector, and the computer sector were not the same sector, but now they're converging in the ICT sector, and that brings a lot of problem in terms of policy, because all these sectors are traditionally approached differently, and especially the internet, which has no regulation on mostly, so that brings us to the problem of dealing with a lot of asymmetrical regulation right now, with the implication that it has on the advantage to some enterprises or actors on the market rather than others. There is also the fact that our industries, the programming, all the industries or production that is based on programming in the TV setup, face the problem of delinearization that is characterized by the ability to access content without having to follow a schedule. And we think this is great for our mobility and our consumption pattern, that can be adapted to our very mobile and busy lives, but at the same time it creates a problem in terms of the setup and the mechanisms of financing local content and local programming, of course. The last one is the most important, and we've touched upon it a little bit. It's the deterritorialization. As the most important challenge. That means that the space where enterprises and the cultural industries are now developing is more and more transnational, whereas the policy space is usually in the within frontiers of the nation state, and so it is increasingly difficult, for instance, to address regulation that will not affect in the same way national or local enterprises and transnational enterprises that can avoid the burden of local regulation. But at the same time, we also need to find ways to engage these transnational actors in a process where they participate and they also respect some kind of policy issues or policy objectives that must not be considered barriers to trade or discrimination. So the result threat from these 5 Ds is obvious. It's the loss of national states, of benchmark and instrument of public policy for their cultural industry. The world in which businesses operate is no longer the same world as the one that is called the national regulatory space. And we then come to the fact that we need to rethink national policies and regulation within a new global governance framework, which is still under construction, and it's still being set up by different kind of actors, as we've said at the beginning. 2 challenges to be taken into account. The first one is that we can act, intervene, but also cut ourselves from the world and fragment the internet, something that perhaps we should not do. But at the same time, if we open up and choose to open up to cross-border flows without taking adequate measures, then perhaps we will not be able to ensure a presence and visibility for cultural products and expression. There need to be a paradigm shift in terms of policy and strategies in order to not to have those boundary problems, but to have intersection between issues. And so instead of ending up with boundary problems, we would probably have like networking of issues, articulation of issues, and that would be the start of something that we can call policy coherence in terms of a new global governance for cultural industries. So I guess I would end there. I think I've been talking way too much, and you're all starving and waiting to go for dinner in this beautiful Madrid. So I will stop here, and if you want to ask me some question or if you have some comments, I would be very glad to note them and to answer your questions if you have any. So thank you for your attention.